Welcome back to the demo on exercise 13. This exercise is the start of a series of exercises to build a simple car model. The car model is not a realistic one. The intent is to use this particular exercise in introducing many basic modeling ideas in Motionview that are generally applicable to all models. In the end, you will be building a full vehicle model, the front and rear suspension, a body, and a steering system, and also learn how to submit more complex analysis. So let us start by opening the model. So File, Open, Model, and you'll be selecting the simple car model in Chapter 13 folder. Okay, so there are no errors detected in this particular model. Say clear. Okay, now first, before adding entities to this particular model, let's go on exploring what's already there in the model. So it has three bodies, which is the ground body that is created by default, knuckle, and a body for the wheel and tire. And it has two graphics for the wheel and tire and the knuckle. It also has two joints, one for the wheel to knuckle, which is basically a revolute joint, and then the knuckle to body, which is a cylindrical joint. It has three motion. One is the motion which represents the motion of the wheel. Next is the motion that represents the motion of the steering. And then the motion that represents the static ride motion. And then we also have 5 hard points that are created. The global origin, which is created by default. The wheel center. The knuckle top. The knuckle center of mass. And the damper middle. And as you can see, as I click on these hard points, you may notice something interesting. It is pointing out to 2 points. This is because these points have been created as pairs and not a single entity. Okay, so I will show that when I'm going to create the spring damper entity for this particular model. So thus the right hand side or the right point will be parameterized with respect to the left point. Okay, so these points that are created are in pairs. So whenever you're dealing with models that contain the left hand side, which is symmetrical to right hand side, then you can use the pair type when you're creating the different entities. Okay, now we've explored what's there in this particular model. I'll just click on run and run this model. Okay, let's go to results. Click on animate. Okay, so this is the animation that you can see on the screen in the HyperView software. Okay, let's go back to Motionview and let's start adding the spring damper entity. Okay, so for that, there are two ways to create the spring damper entity. First one is to right click on this particular icon, or the second method is to go to model, right click, add. Okay, and then you need to go to force entity and then click on spring damper. Okay, so these are the two ways of adding the spring damper. So let's just click on the icon that's there on the toolbar, which is the most easiest way of doing it, and add a spring damper. And we want to create a coil spring, but we want it to be a pair. Okay, so at one shot we are creating two coil springs for the left hand side and for the right hand side. And I also want explicit graphics associated with this particular coil spring. So I am putting a check mark for this option. After doing this, you can click on OK. Now you need to specify body 1, which is the ground body, and the body 2, which is the knuckle, and then the point 1, which will be the knuckle top, which is nothing but this point, and the point 2 is the knuckle center of mass, which is this. So you can see that the coil spring is now created along with its explicit graphics. And I want to make sure that I put a check mark on this particular option, which is symmetric properties. And when I click on this, I get this particular set symmetry dialog box, which asks which side should be the master side. So I can either click on the left or the right, but for now I'll be clicking on the left option. Okay, so whatever properties you apply on the left hand side will get automatically applied to the right hand side too. Okay, so now let's go to properties. So you need to specify the stiffness and the damping ratio for this spring damper. So let's give a value of 100 for the stiffness and say 10 for the damping ratio. Okay, and you can click on the preload tab and you can see that a default value for the free length is already defined here based on the starting point and the ending point of this coil spring. Now what we're going to do is we're going to modify the graphics for this particular coil spring. For that, I will go to the graphic that's been created. Okay, and please know that whatever changes now I do to this radius of this particular spring and also the visualization is just for the sake of visualization. It is not going to affect anything during your model building process. Okay, so here the number of coils or the radius of this particular spring, if I change, it will be just for the sake of visualization. It's not going to alter anything during your model building process. So please keep in mind and don't get confused. Okay, so this is just to make the components or the entities look more prominent. So I'll be changing this value from 35 to 70. You can see that if I just change it for the left hand side, the right hand side also changes automatically. Okay, and just for the sake of visualization, let's select alloy for to change its color, and you can go to the right hand side and also click on alloy to change its color. Okay, so now that's the explicit graphics for the coil. Okay, now it's time to go ahead and create explicit graphics for the damper. Okay, so for that, let's go to the graphics option. Let's start giving meaningful names. Okay, let's call it damper top, and let's also change the variable name. And as I've mentioned multiple times earlier, the variable name can only be changed during the creation of a particular entity. So let me give the same name, damper top. Okay, and I want to create a pair, so I'll leave this type as it is, and I want the entity type to be a cylinder. Okay, and then I click on OK. Now I need to select the parent body, origin, and the direction for this graphic. So for this parent body, I'll be selecting the ground body, and for the origin or the starting point of this graphic or the cylinder, I'll be clicking on point and then selecting the knuckle top. Okay, and then for the direction, I'll be selecting damper middle and then click on OK. You can see that the small tiny cylinder is created now. Okay, so I want to increase the radius of that cylinder that's been created. So I will go to properties and change the radius from 10 mm to 60 mm. Okay, so that the graphic becomes more prominent. And the color, I want it to be like aluminum alloy. So I go to the left and right tabs and change it to aluminum alloy. But again, please remember that you're not changing anything in your modeling. It's just for the sake of visualization you're doing this. Now we've created a graphic for the damper top. Now let's also create a graphic for the damper bottom in the similar manner. So right click on this graphic option. Let's give meaningful names again. Damper bottom. Even here, the variable name should be changed to damper bottom. And I want the type to be pair and the entity type to be cylinder. So click on OK. So go to the connectivity tab. So here for the parent body, select knuckle. And for the starting point of this, select knuckle center of mass. And the ending point, select damper middle. Okay. So you can see that this cylinder is created now. Now again, let's change the properties from 10 mm to say like 40 mm. And the color, you can change it to aluminum alloy. Okay, for both the left hand side and the right hand side. Okay, now this is done. Now it's time to go ahead and create output for the spring. So there are two ways, as I mentioned earlier, to create the output. One is to right click on this particular icon, or you can go to the model browser, say add, and go to general MDL entity and then click on output. Okay, it's basically the same thing. And here I will call it spring damper force. Okay, spring damper force. And I'll change the variable name to spring damper force. And here one more important thing to note is that the label name can have these dashes in between them, but the variable name cannot take these dashes. Okay, so for example, just see when I change it just to dash and try to create an output with this particular label name and this variable name, it's going to give me an error. Okay, so it says that please specify a valid variable name. So that's the reason the variable name should contain only underscores and no spaces also. Okay, it should be just underscores. So now click on OK. So now I'll be changing the displacement type to I'll be changing the type to force. Okay, and it will be on a entity itself, but it won't be on a particular body. Okay, go to this drop down list and select the spring damper. Okay, so once you do that, click on the spring damper and select spring damper left and then click on OK. Now let's animate the model and test the model whether it's working fine. So let's go to run and click on the run option. Okay, so you can close this and click on animate. So refresh. So this is your HyperView. So you can click on animate to see how this model works. Okay, so I also want to visualize the forces here. So what I can do is I can go to the vector option here and the result type should be force, and I want to display both the X, Y, and Z components, and go to the display tab. Here the size you can select by magnitude and you can give a particular value. So let's give it around like 0.02. Okay, and then say hit on apply and then click on animate. Okay, so you can see the forces, the force vector that's actually acting on this particular spring damper. Okay, so the animation looks fine. So let's go back to Motion View. Okay, Now we've come back to the MotionView graphical user interface. Now it's time to create a system from this model so that it can be reused later to create a simple vehicle. Okay, so here let's go and click on the model, right click and say add system or assembly. So you get this add system or assembly dialog box. You can click on system radio button and then click on next. Now let's start giving meaningful names for our system. So for the variable name, let's give simple suspension. Okay, here its label name is going to be simple suspension. And please note that in the label name, spaces are allowed, but in the variable name, it's just going to be the underscores. Okay, so even here, I will change it to simple suspension. Okay, once I do this, I click on OK. So you have this new subsystem that's created, which is simple suspension. Now what I'm going to do is cut and paste all that I've created in this model into the simple suspension. Okay, please take a look at this carefully. So I'll be selecting the bodies, the graphics, joints, motions, outputs, points, and the spring damper. Okay, so and then I'm going to say right click, cut, and I'm going to click on this, right click, and I'll say paste. Okay, it's that simple. So all those entities that I created in the parent model, I've basically cut those and I've pasted it in the simple suspension subsystem. Okay, so you can see that all the required graphics, joints, motions, okay, outputs, the spring dampers, all that they have been successfully pasted into the simple suspension system. Now let's go ahead and run this particular subsystem to see if it works correctly. So let me save this as simple simple suspension system. Okay. So save. Okay. Now I'll be running this. Okay, it's completed. So click on animate. It launches HyperView. Yes, it does work in the correct manner. Okay. So you can pause this. Go back to your motion view. Okay. Now what we need to do is we need to export this particular system for our future views. Okay. So for this, click on the Import Export tab and then click on the Export option. Okay. And then select the file. So you'll give a file name, call it simple suspension system. So that's been already created. So go to all files and it's basically the simple suspension system.mdl. Okay, it's not here. So, okay, let's do one thing. Go here and create that simple suspension system. Okay, so it will be saved as a model definition file called the simple suspension system. And after you do this, just click on quick export. Okay, so now if you go to the same folder, you can see that it is created. So let's go there. Let's go to desktop. So here, let's go to model files. So in model files, chapter 13, okay, you can see that the simple suspension system.mdl has been created. Okay, so that's done. Now what we'll do is we'll close this session. Okay, so I'll open a new session, and now I'll try to import that system that I've created. Okay, so right click on this. So just click on the model and then go to import export tab and then import. You can click on this particular folder, and this is the model that you have exported previously. So you can click on this, say open, and then click on import. Okay, so while importing, it will ask you this whether this is the particular definition that I've given, the label name and the variable name. So everything looks right. So just click on OK. So you can see that the model that you created earlier can be imported easily into this particular parent system. So this simple suspension subsystem has been imported successfully into this model parent system. Okay, so this brings you to the end of this particular exercise demo. Thank you.